Hey everyone, it's Taehyung. I'm really grateful you're here with me today. You know, there are some stories in life that you don't plan to share, stories that live quietly in your heart until one day they find their own way out. What I'm about to tell you isn't just about love, it's about truth, timing, and the moments that change who you are forever. So, sit back, breathe, and let me take you somewhere real back to the day I met the person who changed everything. I don't really know when it started, that feeling that the world around me had gone quiet, even when everything looked so loud. For years, my life had been a loop of bright lights, camera flashes, rehearsals, stages, and crowds that screamed my name. But inside, there were moments where the noise didn't reach me. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something quieter, like standing in a huge empty room after everyone has left and realizing you can finally hear your own breathing. I used to think that kind of silence was dangerous. In this world, we are trained to keep moving, to fill the pauses with sound, to stay visible. But one day, I stopped fighting it. I let the silence stay. And for the first time, I started listening to it. That's when I realized how much of my life had been built around movement. Schedules, planes, stages, interviews, every minute was accounted for. And yet, none of that ever asked me how I felt. It was strange to admit, even to myself, that I didn't know what rest really meant. Rest wasn't just sleeping, it was being okay with stillness. And I hadn't been still in years. One night, I remember sitting by my window after a long day of filming. I looked outside at the streetlights, reflecting off the rain, and I thought, if I keep living like this, what will I have left when the noise fades? I didn't have an answer, so I decided to do something small, something that didn't involve cameras or scripts or expectations. I started visiting a small art space in Seoul. Not many people knew about it. It wasn't glamorous. The walls were painted white but chipped at the corners, and the smell of paint mixed with coffee. It was a community center, really. People came to draw, to play music, to just exist without pressure. At first, I didn't introduce myself. I just showed up. I helped rearrange chairs, painted walls, tuned guitars. For the first time in a long while, I was surrounded by people who didn't care who I was, they just cared that I showed up. There's something humbling about being seen as human first. No one was asking for photos. No one was waiting for me to be perfect. And maybe that's why I kept going back. One afternoon, while helping set up for a small exhibition, I heard a laugh from across the room. It wasn't loud, but it was different. It cut through the background noise in a way that made me look up without thinking. She was standing near the back, helping a child paint something that looked more like a cloud than a flower. Her hair was tied loosely, and her sleeves were rolled up, stained with a bit of blue paint. I don't know what it was, maybe the way she didn't try to be noticed. Maybe it was the quiet focus in her eyes when she looked at the kid's painting and smiled like it was the most beautiful thing in the world. But something inside me paused. For someone who had spent years performing, that small, genuine moment hit me harder than any applause. It was simple, and yet I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing her there. She wasn't an artist by profession. She worked in a nearby flower shop and came to the center to volunteer after work. We didn't talk much at first. It started with small things, passing her the brushes, helping her carry supplies, joking about how bad my painting was. And yet, those quiet exchanges felt more real than entire interviews I'd done. Sometimes I'd catch myself watching how she interacted with others. She never tried to lead, but everyone naturally followed her energy. She listened more than she spoke, and somehow that made her presence magnetic. It wasn't love at first sight. It was slower, softer, like the way sunlight creeps into a dark room without asking for permission. I found myself looking forward to that small space, to the sound of paintbrushes, to her laughter, to the moments that didn't need to be perfect. And in that simplicity, I started to remember what being alive actually felt like. One evening, after the others had gone, we stayed behind to clean up. She played an old song from her phone, something from the 90 seconds that I hadn't heard in years. We laughed about how our playlists were accidentally vintage, and then the conversation just kept going. We talked about art and life and why people are afraid of slowing down. And for the first time, I said something I hadn't said out loud in years, that sometimes I felt like I was living a life too big for me to hold. She didn't give me advice. She just looked at me and said, "Then maybe you just need to hold it differently." I don't know why, but that sentence stayed in my chest for days. Maybe because it was the first time someone saw me, not the version of me that the world expects to see. Looking back, I think that was the moment something inside me shifted, not like fireworks, but like a quiet sunrise. It didn't scream for attention, it just changed everything. That's how it began. That's what really happened when I met my future wife. Not a movie scene, not a fairy tale, but a moment of stillness that turned into a heartbeat I could finally hear. There's a moment that happens when someone begins to matter to you. It's quiet but undeniable. You start noticing the smallest things. The way they brush their hair behind their ear when they're thinking, the way they pause before they speak as if words are something sacred, the way they look at people really look as if they're seeing more than just faces. That's how it was with her. At first, I told myself it was just admiration. I liked that she was so comfortable being ordinary. There was nothing performative about her, nothing rehearsed. When she smiled, it wasn't for anyone's approval. When she laughed, she didn't care who heard. It was the kind of authenticity that felt almost foreign to me. I realized how many of my own smiles had been rehearsed, not fake, just carefully managed. That's what fame does. It teaches you to calculate even your emotions. But with her, calculation didn't exist. And I think that's what drew me in deeper. Every week, I'd find a reason to stop by the community space, even when my schedule was tight. Sometimes I'd bring coffee for the volunteers. Other times, I'd just sit near the window and listen to the noise of people living without pretense. She was always there, sometimes painting, sometimes cleaning, sometimes lost in thought. We didn't need to talk much. There was comfort in the quiet. But one day, she broke it. "Do you ever get tired of being you?" she asked suddenly while we were sorting art supplies. I froze. No one had ever asked me that. Not like that, without judgment, without curiosity for gossip. Just a question, simple and human. Sometimes I said more than I admit. She nodded like she already knew. "You always look like you're holding your breath," she said softly. "Like you forget to exhale when people are watching." That line hit me deeper than I expected. because she was right. I had spent so long holding everything in the expectations, the pressure, the image that I forgot how to just breathe. After that day, something changed between us. She didn't treat me like an idol trying to escape fame. She treated me like a man trying to learn how to exist. She didn't ask for autographs or backstage stories. Instead, she asked about what kind of books I liked, whether I had a favorite sound, what I thought heaven smelled like. Her questions were strange, yet they made me think in ways I hadn't in years. And so we built a kind of rhythm. Sometimes we'd walk home together after volunteering. The air would be cold, our breaths visible in the night. Soul at midnight feels different when you're not rushing somewhere. It feels almost shy, like it's letting you see its softer side. We'd stop by the river sometimes. She liked throwing small stones into the water just to hear the splash. It's proof that something touched the surface, she said once. I remember smiling because that's exactly how she made me feel, like I was finally touching the surface of my own life again. But love, real love, never arrives without fear. There were moments when I wondered if I should walk away. I had seen how cruel the world could be to people associated with me. I didn't want to pull her into that chaos. I didn't want her name whispered, her life dissected. One night I told her that maybe it would be better if we stayed friends, that the spotlight around me doesn't fade, it burns. She just looked at me for a long moment and then said, Taehyung, you don't protect people by disappearing. You protect them by being honest about where you stand. That sentence sat heavy in my chest. I had built an entire life out of learning how to disappear. Behind cameras, behind smiles, behind carefully chosen words. But that night, I didn't want to hide anymore. We stood there by the river, wind tugging at her hair, city lights reflecting on the water like broken stars. I didn't say anything poetic. I just said, okay. And she smiled like that was enough. From then on, things didn't become easier, but they became real. We learned to navigate time in small doses. My schedule would pull me away for weeks, sometimes months. But whenever I returned, she was there, with that same steady calm, that same quiet presence that felt like home. There were days we didn't talk much, just sat in silence, drinking coffee, sharing space. And yet, those silences said everything words couldn't. I remember one night in particular, we were sitting in her tiny apartment, surrounded by half-finished canvases. It smelled like lavender and paint thinner. I picked up a brush and asked her to teach me how to paint. She laughed and said, "You already paint just with sound?" That's when I realized love doesn't demand transformation. It teaches you how to recognize yourself again. She didn't ask me to be less famous. She didn't ask me to be more normal. She just asked me to be present. And maybe that's harder than any performance I've ever done. Because being present means staying even when things get uncomfortable. It means letting someone see you when you're not composed. It means choosing to be human again and again. As weeks turned into months, our bond deepened quietly, steadily, like music that doesn't rush to its chorus. There were no grand confessions, no dramatic declarations, just two people learning how to exist together without losing themselves. And every time I left for another city, another show, another stage, I carried her words with me. You don't protect people by disappearing. It became a mantra not just for love, but for life. Because somewhere between the noise and the silence, I had found something worth staying for. And though I didn't know it yet, those simple, ordinary moments were leading me toward the day my entire life would shift the day. I'd realize she wasn't just someone I loved. She was someone I was meant to meet at the exact moment when I finally learned how to listen. There's a strange duality that comes with fame. It gives you everything and takes everything at the same time. You can touch the stars, but you can't walk down the street without a disguise. You can pour your heart into music that moves millions, yet struggle to say, I miss you, to one person without it turning into a headline. When my feelings for her deepened, I realized how complicated my world truly was. Love wasn't the problem, exposure was. And in a life where privacy is a currency, I had very little left to spend. At first, we managed it easily. We met in quiet places, late night cafes that stayed open for artists and insomniacs, or small parks where the city forgot to build lights. We didn't hold hands in public. We didn't take photos. We didn't even save messages that could be screenshotted. It wasn't about secrecy for the sake of mystery, it was survival. I remember one evening we were walking near the Han River. It was freezing but peaceful. I had a cap pulled low and a mask on. As usual, she teased me, saying I looked like a spy, trying too hard not to get caught. I laughed, but the truth was, I hated that she couldn't walk beside me without fear, that our love had to hide behind shadows and whispers. Do you ever get tired of pretending? She asked once, her voice gentle, not accusing. Every day, I said honestly, but if pretending means keeping this safe, I'd do it 1,000 times. She didn't say anything at first. Then she reached for my hand just for a moment, just long enough for me to feel the warmth of her fingers before letting go again. I don't need safe, she whispered. I just need honest. That line haunted me for weeks. Honesty had always been a luxury in my world, one wrapped in caution and control. I wanted to be transparent with her, but I also wanted to protect her from the chaos that came with me. It was a constant war between the man I was and the image the world demanded. And the more I tried to balance the two, the more exhausted I became. I remember a night after a world tour concert in Paris. The stage lights had dimmed, the crowd had roared its last goodbye, and I stood alone backstage, still shaking from the adrenaline. Thousands of people had screamed my name, and yet the only person I wanted to hear it from was thousands of miles away. I called her. It was past 3 a.m. in Seoul, but she answered anyway. You sound tired, she said. I am, I admitted, but it's not from the show. There was a pause, the kind of silence that understands before words do. Do you want to talk about it? She asked softly, and so I did. For an hour, I spoke not as Taehyung the performer, not as V from BTS, but as a man who was scared of losing himself again. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, the way she always did. When I finished, she said, You don't have to be strong with me. You just have to be real. It was such a simple thing to say, but it felt like the safest thing I'd heard in years. That night, I realized something. Love isn't about grand moments. It's about who you call when the lights go out. But even with all that tenderness, reality still had its way of intruding. One afternoon, rumors started surfacing online, anonymous posts, blurry photos, speculation. Someone had seen me near the community center months ago. Someone else claimed I'd been with a girl who wasn't a celebrity. At first, I ignored it. You learn to, the internet lives on fantasy. But then, the noise grew louder. Me manager called. Hyung, I said, already knowing what he was going to say. He sighed. We might need to manage this before it gets out of hand. I knew what manage meant. Deny, distance, disappear. But that night, when I saw her, I couldn't bring myself to say any of those things. She was sitting on the same old couch at the center, humming a song under her breath. When I told her about the rumors, she just smiled sadly. I knew this might happen, she said. It's okay. But it wasn't, because for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for me, for what the world might turn our story into. I wanted to promise her that it would be fine, that I could protect her, that people would understand, but we both knew better. The world doesn't always understand simple human love, especially when it belongs to someone constantly watched. We sat in silence for a long time. Then she said, You don't have to choose between your world and mine. You just have to find a way to make space for both. It sounded impossible, but her voice made me believe it might not be. After that, we started living more deliberately. Less fear, more intention. We didn't go out often, but when we did, we stopped hiding so much. A quick walk, a quiet dinner, a shared laugh that maybe someone nearby would notice, and maybe that was okay. Because love, I learned, doesn't have to be loud to be strong. It just has to be true. And as time passed, I began to realize something else. The world only has as much power as you give it. The more I owned my truth, the less I cared about the noise. And that truth was simple. She was my calm in the chaos. But life, as always, has its own timing. And soon, something happened that neither of us saw coming, something that would test everything we had built, every promise we made, every ounce of courage it took to love in silence. It began with a single phone call, and it changed everything. I still remember the sound of that phone call, how it cut through the night like a blade through silence. I was sitting in my studio, the room lit only by the glow of the monitors. The track I'd been working on was looping in the background, a soft, unfinished melody that suddenly felt too fragile to touch. The screen lit up. Her name, I smiled instinctively, ready to tease her for calling at midnight. But when I answered, I didn't hear her voice, at least not the way I knew it. She was crying. Taehyung. Her voice cracked, and I felt my chest tighten instantly. What happened? There was a pause, and then they found out. I didn't need her to explain. I knew exactly what she meant. The rumors that had been floating around for weeks, they weren't rumors anymore. Someone had taken photos, clear ones this time, of us walking by the river. At the center, even that night, I thought no one was watching. Within hours, the internet exploded. Headlines, hashtags, endless analysis of every expression on my face. Fans arguing, media speculating, strangers deciding what kind of man I was, all without ever knowing me. I'd been through scandals before, whispers and stories that faded as quickly as they came. But this was different because this time it wasn't just my life being dissected, it was hers. Her social media flooded, people found where she worked. Some sent her cruel messages, others accused her of chasing fame, of being a distraction, of being unworthy. And all I could think was, I did this. The next morning, I went to the company building early, before the sun, before anyone else could stop me. I walked straight into my manager's office. He looked at me with that expression, half concern, half damage control. We're already handling it, he said. The PR team is drafting a statement. What kind of statement? I asked quietly. The usual. You know, they're just close friends, or maybe he was filming a project. We can frame it however we want. I stared at him for a long moment. And then I said, no, not this time. He blinked. Taehyung? I'm not lying, I said. My voice came out firmer than I expected. Not about her. It was the first time in years I'd said no to my management like that. And it terrified me. But it also felt right. The truth was, I didn't want to protect my image anymore. I wanted to protect her, and the only way to do that was to stop pretending. Still, honesty comes with a price. That evening, I called her again. She sounded tired, her voice small. They're saying horrible things about you, she whispered. About us. I know. I didn't mean to cause trouble for you. Maybe it's better if don't, I interrupted. Don't finish that sentence. There was silence. And then, softly, I said, you didn't cause this. I did. By loving you, yes, but that's something I'll never apologize for. She didn't speak, but I could hear her breathing slow, shaky, and then she said something I'll never forget. Then don't just protect me, Tae. Protect what we have, even if it hurt. That night, I barely slept. I watched the sunrise through my studio window. The city still buzzing with headlines that didn't belong to me anymore. For the first time, I felt what it meant to truly be seen, not as an idol, but as a human who dared to love. Later that week, I posted something on Weavers. Not a statement, not an explanation, just a message. I wrote, sometimes the things we care about the most are the hardest to keep safe. But love isn't meant to hide, it's meant to heal. The fans were divided. Some supported me, others felt betrayed. But that was okay, because for once, I wasn't performing, I was living, and then for a while, everything went quiet. The company stepped back, the noise faded, but silence doesn't always mean peace. Behind the calm, I could feel the distance growing not from the public, but between us. We stopped meeting as often. Every call felt shorter. Every message carried more hesitation. Not because we didn't love each other, but because we were both exhausted from fighting a war we never wanted to start. One night, she said something that broke me in a way I didn't expect. Taehyung, I don't want your life to shrink because of me. I told her it wasn't, but deep down, I knew what she meant. Every step I took, every word I said, was being weighed by people who didn't know her heart. She was paying the price for being loved by me, and that was never fair. So I made a choice. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I loved her too much to let her carry my burden. I told her we needed space time to let things settle. She didn't cry this time. She just nodded. Promise me, she said. Promise me this won't change the way you remember us. I looked at her, memorizing everything her eyes, her smile, the quiet strength that drew me to her in the first place. I promise, I said. We didn't say goodbye because somehow goodbye felt too final for something that had changed my life so completely. That night, I went back to my studio and sat in the dark. The same melody from before was still looping unfinished, waiting for words. So I wrote them, every note, every lyric, every ache, not for the world, not for the charts, but for her. It became a song about love that couldn't be public, about promises made in silence, about the courage it takes to walk away without losing what's real. That song was never released, but it lives in my heart, the only place where her name still echoes freely. And even now, when I hear that melody, I can still see her standing by the river, smiling under the stars before the world ever knew our secret. That was the night I understood something. Sometimes love doesn't end because it fades. Sometimes it ends because it's too beautiful for the world to understand. There's a certain silence that follows heartbreak, not the loud kind filled with tears or noise, but the stillness that seeps into everything. It's the silence in the studio after a melody stops, the quiet of a room that used to echo with laughter, the kind of silence that doesn't ask questions, it just lingers. After we parted ways, my days felt longer. I'd go through the motions, photo shoots, rehearsals, interviews, smiling when the camera light blinked red, speaking when someone cued me to. But when everything ended for the day and the world went dark, I'd return to that same small studio, the place where she and I had once left, over bad coffee and half-written songs. The couch still had the blanket she used to fall asleep under while I worked. Her favorite mug sat on the shelf, chipped near the handle. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. That room became my confession booth. I'd sit at the piano, let my fingers find the same old chords, and let my heart do what my voice couldn't speak the truth. Music had always been my language, but now it wasn't just an art form, it was therapy. Every lyric I wrote carried a piece of her, not her name, not her story, but her essence. Some songs were soft, the kind that felt like whispers in the dark. Others were painful, raw, filled with the ache of wanting something you can't touch anymore. And then there were songs that surprised me, ones that sounded like peace. Because even though the love ended, it didn't destroy me. It changed me. I started to realize that not every love story needs a happy ending to have meaning. Some exist to teach you, to soften you, to remind you that you're still capable of feeling something real in a world built on illusions. When I performed again after everything happened, something in me had shifted. I wasn't singing for perfection anymore. I was singing for truth. At one of the concerts, I remember standing on stage, thousands of lights shining like stars. The crowd was chanting my name, the music swelling around me. But in that moment, I didn't see cameras or faces. I saw her, just for a heartbeat, like she was there in the crowd somewhere, smiling the way she used to when I'd play for her. And it hit me. Maybe love doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes a melody, a memory, a quiet kind of strength that follows you wherever you go. One day, I was writing with a producer friend in the studio. He noticed the emotion in the new song. I'd been working on a slow, bittersweet track with no chorus, just verses that drifted like a confession. He asked, "Who's this about?" I smiled faintly. "Someone who taught me that silence can be love too." He didn't ask again. He just nodded. Because sometimes musicians don't need explanations, we just feel it. As the months passed, the world moved on, like it always does. New projects came, new music, new faces, but the version of me that loved her, the version that was brave enough to choose truth over control, stayed. I didn't reach out to her again. Not because I didn't want to, but because I finally understood that some goodbyes are gifts. They give you space to grow, to heal, to rediscover who you are without the noise of what ifs. And yet, even in the quiet, she was everywhere. In the way I noticed sunsets, in the warmth of coffee in the morning, in the way I looked at the world differently. She taught me to slow down, to see life beyond schedules and scripts, to listen not just with my ears, but with my heart. There's one moment I'll never forget. A few months later, I was walking along the Han River again alone this time. It was the same spot where she once held my hand in secret. I sat down on the same bench, the city lights flickering over the water, and I realized something. I wasn't sad anymore. I missed her, yes, but it didn't hurt the same way. Because missing someone doesn't always mean you want them back. Sometimes it means you're grateful they existed. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, and typed, "You were never my mistake. You were my music." That line became the closing lyric of a new song I released later that year. Fans loved it. They said it felt personal, different, real. And maybe that's because that song wasn't just about love. It was about learning to let love go without bitterness, about finding light in loss, about understanding that even heartbreak can be holy when it's honest. As I stood on stage performing it for the first time, I felt peace, true peace, because I wasn't trying to hide anymore. And somewhere deep down, I knew she would have been proud of that. Love didn't end for me when she walked away. It just found a new form, one made of sound and memory. A love the world couldn't photograph or expose. Just a love that lived quietly in the chords, in the lyrics, in the spaces between the notes. That's where she'll always stay. Not as a secret, not as regret, but as music that still breathes in me. And now, looking back, I realize that every moment, every laugh, every silence, every goodbye was exactly as it needed to be. I used to think love was something you had to hold on to tightly, that if you let go, it would vanish forever. But I've learned that the most beautiful kind of love doesn't end when it changes form. It lives quietly inside you, shaping the way you see the world, the way you write, the way you breathe. She taught me that without even trying. You see, fame gives you a spotlight, but it also takes away your shadows. It leaves little space for quiet truths. But because of her, I learned to find comfort in the unseen moments, the ones without cameras, without filters, without noise. That's where real life happens. And maybe that's the whole point of this story. Not every love has to last forever to mean something. Some are meant to arrive, teach you, change you, and then fade, leaving behind something more powerful than possession, peace. So if you're listening to this and holding on to someone or something that feels like it's slipping away, maybe this is your sign. Let it go gently. Let it become something softer, a lesson, a melody, a memory. Because love, when it's real, doesn't disappear. It transforms. It turns into strength, into art, into the quiet courage to keep believing in connection even after heartbreak. As for me, I'm still writing, still learning, still healing. But I carry her story in every song, in every note that reaches you. Maybe that's what love was always meant to do, not to stay, but to echo. Thank you for listening, for feeling this with me, and for giving my truth a place to breathe. Until next time, stay kind, stay real, and don't be afraid to love even when it hurts.